All right, so the first thing we have to know about tonight's class, the Talmudic wisdom for life, which is although we've been studying the Pirkei Avot, ethics of our fathers, which are the ethical and moral teachings of the Talmud, and we're continuing to do that tonight. This chapter that we read from tonight, hi everyone, is actually not from the Pirkei Avot, although we consider it part of the Pirkei Avot. Now that gets a little confusing. What does that mean? So to introduce this chapter, I'll bring up the screen here and show you how this chapter opens, and then try to explain. Here we are. Talmud opens up this chapter saying, Shanu Chachamim Bilshon Mishnah, Baruch Shebachar Bohem Uve Mishnatam. The sages expounded in the language of the Mishnah. Blessed is the one who chose them and their learning. So the sages expounded in the language of the Mishnah. That seems to imply that this is similar to the Mishnah, the language of the Mishnah, but not quite the Mishnah. And that refers to the historical fact that the Mishnah is a collection of teachings of Talmudic sages from the period of the Second Temple, so the last couple centuries before the Common Era, in the first 2 centuries of the Common Era. They taught the oral law as it was passed to Moses through the generations, and finally, reaching their time, it was committed to writing. So the Mishnah obviously didn't include everything of those hundreds of years of teaching, but rather condensed the critical messages. But there are more teachings of what was known as Baraisa that might have similar or additional information on top of the Mishnah, and those were not included in the formal Mishnah that we have before us. Now, in the case of Pirkei Avot and the ethics of our fathers that we're studying right now, we've been studying this season between Passover and Shavuot, so the custom is to study a chapter each Shabbat. The problem is that there's more Shabbatot, more weeks than chapters. There are 6 Shabbats in this period of time, and only 5 chapters in Pirkei Avot and ethics of our fathers, and therefore we add an additional chapter, which is really a collection of similar ideas from the sages of the Mishnah, which were not actually included in the Mishnah. Shanu Chachamim Bilshon Mishnah, our sages expounded in the language of the Mishnah, but this is not actually a formal part of the Mishnah itself. And the overarching theme of this chapter is the study of Torah. It's not by chance that we read this chapter this coming Shabbat, which is the final Shabbat between the holiday of Shavuot, before the holiday of Shavuot, which will be next Friday, starting Thursday evening. The holiday of Shavuot is when we celebrate the moment at Mount Sinai when the Torah was given to the Jewish people. So it is the right time to study this chapter all about the unique quality of studying the Torah. So with that said and done, we're ready to start studying this chapter and start discussing it as we've been doing each week. A little warning is in order that this is going to be the kind of reading, a real agadic reading. Now, agada means that we're reading portions of the Talmud which are not legalistic. They're not where they discuss Jewish law and practice, but ideas, teachings, particularly homiletical teachings, sometimes cryptic teachings. Yet the Talmud says that the greatest secrets of the Torah are found within these agadic teachings. So we're going to read something that sounds a little cryptic, but we're going to dig in and discover its unique, deeper meaning and what that can mean for all of us in our own lives. So let us begin. Here we are. I have to go way down to Mishnah number 10.
That's the only thing they're doing is one at the end. And nothing else there in the opinion.
Sorry?
I just received the email today from Rabbi Gronder. It's a visual. It's a long email. But in this email, it's kind of discouraging people over 60 to that future potential media, 60s and 70s and so on. So that the case, if we make the same approach, you have a high percentage of people over 60 now. So Talmud, speak for yourself. I have two people here who are under 60. One a lot under, one not so much.
Sorry, just getting a little trouble here.
Yeah, a little hard to hear.
I'm not ready to go and trust me. I'm close to it. We got Bruce. Bruce is under 60. So, if that's the case, and if you have recommendation, it's going to be a challenge to consider media. That's why we have.
All right, so just something was coming in our way. Now we are ready to continue. So I've muted everyone. So if you would like to say something, just pipe up, unmute yourself before you start to speak. So here we are at Mishnah 10, the 10th Mishnah in this discussion. There are 5 acquisitions that God acquired in his world. These are: the Torah is one acquisition. Heaven and earth are one acquisition. Avram is one acquisition. The people of Israel are one acquisition. And the Holy Temple is one acquisition. So right on the start, we have a cryptic Mishnah reading. There are 5 acquisitions that God acquired in his world. One is the Torah, the heaven and the earth, and etc., etc. But one second. What does it mean that God acquired 5 acquisitions in his world? What does it mean that God is buying things, he's acquiring things in this world? Didn't God create this world? Isn't it all God's world? What does God have to acquire? What does it mean to acquire things in a world that's already his? Now, of course, you can say that it means to recognize that this is God's world, but we don't always do that anyway. So what's actually acquired here? How does this become acquired to God in his world? What does that even mean? Our other question is more technical, that if there are 5 acquisitions, so the Torah is 1, well, heaven and earth should be number 2, Abraham number 3. Instead, we keep saying one acquisition, listing each one as one. We should say the Torah is the first, heaven and earth is the second, Abraham is the third, and build up to 5. Why do we keep saying kinyan echad? Each one is one acquisition. So let's try to understand this all.
5 or 6 days, there's going to be thunderstorms.
Let's try to understand this by looking back into some of the commentary. Now we have a commentary on the Mishnah, 16th century commentary known as Medrash Shmuel. And the Medrash Shmuel explains, what does kinyan mean here? Well, kinyan means what people like to say, that you get what you pay for. If you get what you pay for, well, that means that some things are more valuable than others. And I may have many things, but I really value the ones that I pay for. I really value the ones that I invest in. Those things that I get easily without investment, they're not valued they're not appreciated in the same way. Ask a soldier who might tell you that freedom is so precious it needed to be fought for with his very life. That's somebody taking something that we usually take for granted, but because he invested in that, that has suddenly become so precious and valuable to him. So in contemporary times, we might have a lot of things, but those things that we really invest in, those things that we have to buy, those are the things that are really precious to us. I saw a beautiful anecdote, and I don't know if it's even true, but the message is certainly true, where an older fellow is in his 90s, unfortunately diagnosed with the coronavirus, and he ends up in the hospital and on a respirator. Well, he's on the respirator, but somehow, thank God, he recovers and he's off the ventilator and he's breathing on his own, and soon enough, he's ready to go home. At discharge, they give him a bill. He looks at the bill and he starts to cry. And the nurse says, please don't cry. If you have trouble paying for this, we can work something out. Don't cry now that you've recovered from such danger. You should be happy. I said, no, I'm not crying about the bill. I'm not crying about the price. That's not the problem. I'm crying, I'm moved to tears because I see here that one day on the ventilator cost $1,000. $1,000 for one day on the ventilator. In order to breathe for that one day, I have to pay $1,000. What about the last 93 years? I've been breathing every single day with the lungs that God gave me, the oxygen that God gave me for free. So I suddenly realize how valuable it is. In other words, for 93 years, he didn't necessarily realize the gift and the powerful value of life that God had given him because it was taken for granted. Once he had to pay for it, he understood how valuable and precious this is. So when we say that God is acquiring 5 things in his world, these are the 5 acquisitions that God acquires. Well, if there are 5 acquisitions, these are 5 things that God values especially dearly within the universe that he created. So of course, God created everything and everyone in every detail, but God has a special relationship. God holds dear, near and dear to himself 5 special things in this world, as we read, the Torah and Abraham, the Jewish people, etc. But for each one of these, the Mishnah says that the Torah, kinyan echad, 1 acquisition. Abraham, kinyan echad, a 2nd acquisition, etc., etc. Each one its own acquisition. Each one, we say 1 as opposed to 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. That was our other question. Why do we say Torah is 1 acquisition, heaven and earth are 1 acquisition, Abraham is 1? We should say 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. Well, this actually teaches us something very important. And that is that we should be valuing all of these things equally. The Torah is 1, heaven and earth are 1, Abraham is 1, the people of Israel are 1, the Holy Temple is 1. We have to value them all equally. Each one of them are 1 acquisition. Neither of them are the 1st or the 2nd or the 3rd. In other words, God creates everything, and we're saying that he especially loves these. Well, we may be tempted to differentiate among these 5 things that God creates. The Mishnah tells us no. Treat them all with that full attention and that full love and that full respect, because God loves and treasures them all equally. So that means when we say here that the Torah is one of the special things in this world, as well as heaven and earth, that means the very laws of nature themselves are one of the special valuable things in this world. Abraham is one of those special things, etc., etc. Each of those we value completely and equally with the others. The Lubavitcher Rebbe famously made a statement when he first accepted the role of the leadership of Chabad in 1951. So after, at the gathering of the Hasidim where the Rebbe taught his first discourse, formally accepting the role of the leadership, the Rebbe said, in the United States, where he had recently arrived, it's customary that a leader has to make a statement, something dramatic, something shocking, something that will wake everyone up. So I'm going to make a statement. And the statement is that you should all be aware that there are three loves of which the Torah speaks. The Torah commands us, we read it every day in the Shema, to love God. The Torah commands us to love the Torah itself and cherish its mitzvahs. And the Torah also commands us, Ahavat Yisrael, to love a fellow Jew, to love each other. Love your fellow man like yourself. Well, we might be tempted to think that one is more important than the other, or one takes precedence over the other. Says that the Rebbe in his opening statement, no. Those three loves are intertwined and they're equally valuable. We love God and we love his Torah and we love the Jewish people, and neither can take precedence over the other. We can't get away with only love of the people, yet we can also not get away with only love of God and mistreatment of people. That's what our Mishnah tells us. That our love of the Torah is one, but our love of the Jewish people is also one. God cherishes the Torah, God cherishes the temple. He also cherishes Abraham, the Jewish people, and even the very universe also as one acquisition, each one equally with the other. And if we look back at the Mishnah, we see what these five acquisitions are. So the Torah is one, that's easy to understand. Heaven and earth are one. Now, what does that mean? That essentially means the land, the laws of nature, the rules of the earth and the rules of the heavens, the higher type of rules, the structure of the universe in which we live is also one. Abraham as the forebearer of the Jewish people, and then the people of Israel themselves, and finally the Holy Temple. This is all, each one acquisition. And what that means, in other words, when we talk about treating them all equally, is both the love of people equal with our love of Torah, and also remembering that the Torah wishes that we incorporate the laws of nature. And we do our best to live the life of this world according to the Torah. We do not shun the life of this world, yet we do not get caught up with the material life of this world. We carry a complete balance of the love of the Torah and the love of the world, and the ways of the universe in which we live. In Jewish religion, as opposed to most others, the ultimate goal is not spiritual. The ultimate goal is that we bring that spirituality to life in this physical world, in this heaven and earth. So the Torah is one acquisition, yet the heaven and earth are also one acquisition. Now, what's interesting to note here is that the mitzvahs of the Torah, and really everything in the Torah, functions as a body and a soul. And what that means is that there are layers to everything we study in the Torah. There are layers to the mitzvahs. There are layers to the teachings. Each one can be understood on its basic level, as well as at a much deeper level, as well as at an alternative level. Each thing in the Torah has multifacets. We talk about the law, but there's also a mystical interpretation to that same law. Just as you bump into a human being, you might see the body, but there's also emotions inside. and also a soul inside. So there are layers to everything. When we encounter something in the Torah, we might encounter one particular layer, but we should be aware that that layer corresponds and matches to the other layers of the topic, the other layers that are out there. And what's fascinating in this particular case is that these 5 things that God acquires in his world, in other words, the 5 special relationships that God maintains within the world that he created, they reflect themselves in our lives and in our responsibility as the Torah lays it out for us. In other words, we partner with God. God takes these 5 steps and maintains these 5 relationships in the world he created, and we have 5 obligations towards our children who we bring into this world and we raise. Let's see how the Talmud tells us about those 5 obligations. The Talmud in Tractate Kiddushin, a father is obligated to do the following for his son: to circumcise him, to redeem him, which means the pidyon haben for a firstborn son. After 30 days, we contribute to the Kohen in order to have the Kohen serve in the temple as opposed to the firstborn son, to teach him Torah, to find a wife for him to marry, and to teach him a trade. 5 obligations that a parent has to a child, 5 obligations that we have to God in how we raise the children that we've brought together with God into this world. And these correspond to those 5 special relationships. We said that God has one of those special relationships with Abraham. Avraham Kinyan Echad. Well, Abraham is the father of circumcision, the first one to be circumcised. We said that one of those relationships with the Jewish people. When did God start his relationship with the Jewish nation? When he redeemed us from Egypt. We're also responsible to redeem, to quote unquote, buy back the child from the Kohen. To teach him Torah obviously corresponds to God's acquisition of the Torah. To find a wife for him to marry is the other acquisition, the holy temple in Jerusalem that God has in this world, which is described as the marital home for us and God. If we are spouses to God, as it were, well, the relationship between the spouses is a relationship of building a home together. We build that home with God in the Beis HaMikdash in the Holy Temple. And that corresponds to the obligation that we have to our children to help them get married. And finally, to teach them a trade, to help the child be able to earn a living, corresponds to that 5th acquisition that God has in this world, the world itself, the laws of nature. We help a child be successful in the ways of this world by teaching him a trade with which he or she can support themselves. That said, let's dig deeper into the soul of this teaching and understand something very interesting. We started off by saying that there are 5 acquisitions that God acquired in this world: the Torah, the heaven and earth, etc., etc. And we wanted to know, what does it mean that God has an acquisition in a world which is all his? What kind of acquisition would he possibly need? He created that world. What is there to acquire? And we've given one explanation, that acquisition means something that you hold especially valuable. But a deeper explanation, an explanation of Chassidus, is that God acquiring means that in these things, God's presence is revealed, God's presence is expressed, God's presence is visible and can be recognized. The Kotzker Rebbe famously once opened the door to his study and came into the synagogue and found the Chassidim there, and he said, "Where is God?" So some said God is everywhere. Others said God is in the heavens. Others tried God is in the temple. God is in the Torah. And they each tried their luck. And the Kotzker Rebbe just shook his head and said, no, God is wherever you let him in. So yes, God is everywhere. And yes, God created everything and it's all his. He doesn't need to acquire it. But God is found wherever we let him in. And these 5 things are the 5 things of letting God into this world, of revealing God's presence in this world. The Torah, with which we find closeness to God by studying God's teaching. Heaven and earth themselves, with which we can experience and recognize the greatness of God who created them. Abraham was the first one to recognize God and to teach the world of his presence. The people of Israel who have the mission to reveal God in this world, and the Holy Temple, which was the place where God's presence was revealed. So what does it mean God has 5 acquisitions? It means we're letting God in. It means God is manifest in these 5 things. It means these are 5 ways to express God's presence in a world which is, of course, totally his, but too many people turn their back on him. God is wherever you let him in. And that's why I want to conclude with a little video clip. I've shown this many times, so some of you may already recognize it from other classes we've had over the years, but this is a very powerful expression of what it means to let God in, and that God is found in the place where you let him in. So I figured we should show that tonight. So let's go ahead.
In 1972, Elliot Lasky was a student at State University of New York at Buffalo.
I grew up went to yeshivas, kept Shabbos, and at the age of 18, as many people back in the 60s started having questions and totally left the derech. Back in 1972, I was on a concert tour with the Rolling Stones on their American tour. It was a 2-month summer tour. I was 24 years old at the time, and not exactly a spiritual experience, let's say, but several months later after that tour, I had a friend contact me from California that just came to New York from France. He was a Zen Buddhist, not Jewish. I was in the house of a very close friend of mine. His name was Chip Monk, who was the staging and lighting manager for the Rolling Stones. And meanwhile, my friend is laying this whole Zen Buddhist outline to me, and it sounded very interesting. And for some reason, spiritually, I awakened, and I'm asking myself, how can Yiddishkeit be right and the whole world wrong? It was the question that kept me circulating in my mind. And I had a close relationship with Rabbi Gurari, who was the shliach in Buffalo. At the time, I was in the University of Buffalo, even though I was taking time off for the music industry. And I called him, and I started sharing some of the questions with him. I was in New York at the time, and he said, there's only one person that could help you, and that's the Lubavitcher Rebbe. He gave me an address. Go to 770 Eastern Parkway, meet my brother-in-law, I believe his name was Yossi Hendel. You seek him out, and you come exactly at this time. It was the bitter cold winter day in January of 1973. You'll meet my brother-in-law, and the Rebbe will be going. He's coming from the Oyel to daven Mincha, and he'll come out in front of 770, and maybe you'll have an opportunity to talk to him. And I'll try to paint a picture of what I looked like at the time. I'm wearing snakeskin boots, and tight jeans, and a leather jacket, no gray, not in my beard, not in my very long hair that was shoulder length at the time. I'm waiting outside, and I saw an old limousine pull up, and I remember Yossi moved back away from it, and distinguished Rav comes out of the car, and I go over and approach the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And Yiddish is my first language, as I said earlier, and I stopped him right in front of the steps of 770. I went over to him, and in Yiddish, and I learned Yiddish at home, so there's going to be some grammatical and errors in it, but I stopped the Rebbe and said, Entschuldigung, instead the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Excuse me, are you the Lubavitcher Rebbe? Our eyes lock. I never in my life saw eyes. I never saw eyes like the Rebbe's eyes before. And he didn't say, yes, I am the Rebbe. He didn't say no. He said, was ist dein Name? What is your name? And where are you from? I give him my name, where I'm from, where my parents are from. And I said, I have a question. He says, Frag, ask. And I ask him, and our eyes are locked. It's all of a sudden, it's like there's nothing around us. It's just the two of us. It was an incredibly spiritual experience for me. And I asked him, wo is God? Where is God? And the Rebbe answers me, every place. I said, ich weiß, I know. But where? And he answers again. In Yiddish, we're talking. Umitum in alles, in everything, in every place. In a beam, in a tree, in a stain, in a stone. I'm quoting word for word. And I say to the Rebbe, ich weiß, I know, but where? And he said something that really blew me away, so to speak. He said, in dein Herz, if das ist wieder fragst, in your heart, if this is how you're asking. I found that it would be difficult to express myself in philosophical terms of Yiddish. I asked him if I can switch to English, and he said, speak in English. And our eyes are still totally locked. I felt like we were transported to another time, to another place, really transcending the physical bounds. And I asked him, isn't it when we say, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, whether you are a Jew or a black man or an Indian, there's only one God for all of us. And the Rebbe answered, the essence of the black man is to be what he is as a black man. And the essence of the Indian is to be what he is as an Indian. And the essence of the Jew is tied to Hashem Yisbarach through Torah and mitzvahs. And those, for me, was very, very powerful words. We spoke for approximately 15 minutes on the steps of 770 in a very, very bitter, cold day in January. And he gave me two things to do. One, to learn the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch in English, and the other to start putting on tefillin. The Rebbe went on. I guess I must have kept him for Mincha. And I went back to my friend's place. I didn't change the next day. I didn't change 2-3 weeks later. But about 2-3 months down the line, I started putting on tefillin, which I had not put on for several years. From that day till today, I've never missed. And as they say, mitzvah gereres mitzvah, one mitzvah leads to another mitzvah. Baruch Hashem, today I have 4 beautiful children, all of them in Derech Hashem.
So as we've been speaking, that yes, the whole world is God's world, but God is where we let him in. As the Rebbe told this fellow, where is God? God is everywhere. But if this is how you're asking, then this is where he is, in your heart. if you're letting God in, if you're insisting on finding and connecting to God, if this is how you keep searching and asking, then God is actually in your heart. So 5 acquisitions God acquires in this world, 5 places, well, really ideas, the Jewish people, the Torah, etc., where we let God in, where we experience that connection with God and we share that with the other acquisition, with the heaven and earth, with the universe around us. The holiday of Shavuos is coming just next week. The Torah was given to us at Mount Sinai. This is the right time for us to let God in a little bit more, to be part of that acquisition, to have God inside our hearts. Next Thursday, we will not be able to have this class because Thursday night, right around this time, Shavuot will begin. So we will do the next class of this series on the following Thursday. Of course, meanwhile, we will have our other classes on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. Please keep in touch. Look out for the information coming your way. And meanwhile, have a great Shabbos and a great weekend. Before we close up, we'd love to take some questions, comments, concerns, disagreements, whatever it might be.
Good Shabbos, Rabbi. Thank you.
Good Shabbos, thank you.
All right. Well, if everybody's in agreement, then I must have done something wrong. I'll try to fix it next time. Meanwhile, have a good night and a good Shabbos.
You
Thank
too.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.